Sure. So my name is Linda Gould, and I'm going to read something today from the White Enso, which is the literary journal. It's actually something called a haibun, which is a mixture of poetry and prose. So I'll go right into it. The name of it is called The Warmth of Snow, and it's by Anna Ojinaka. Bare feet exposed, pink against the snow. My face burns hot. There is a procession making its way through the streets of Yoshiwara, bright and loud, inviting people from every corner of the neighborhood to take a look at the festive parade. There are drummers and other musicians. There are people dressed as fox spirits, women dressed as men, and young girls in red kimonos with painted faces. This is all before the arrival of the crowning jewel of the procession, the oiran. She is a courtesan of high skill and rank. Despite her small frame, she is raised high above everyone else by the thick platform of her sandals. It is winter, and the ground is covered in a layer of pristine snow. But the oiran's feet are naked, the pink digits of her toes exposed to the elements. Her name is rendered beautifully in black ink on a lantern, so that all who see it may know her name. Not that they need any reminder. She is arguably the most famous courtesan in the entire district. Her name is Yuki, a simple name for an extraordinary girl. Yuki is on her way to see a client. Her earnings will be the biggest sum ever paid out for the company of a courtesan. But this fact stirs neither pride nor joy in Yuki's heart. It had turned to ice long ago. Well, Japan has a long history of inviting foreigners into the country to teach English, and so many of them are writers and academics, or they have, English degrees or something. So when I was giving tours around my town, that information combined with the people who I met who would talk about how Japan inspired them creatively just made me think that we could use another outlet for maybe exposing some of the work and giving people who do this work, who are inspired by Japan, to have an outlet for their creativity. And there are some that are already out there, but there aren't a lot. So I just wanted to provide something that didn't focus just on the literary arts, but included also visual arts and all the different ways that people are inspired by Japan. I started it during the pandemic, so that was, I think, January of 2020. I love ghost stories, and I'm a writer of ghost stories, and I used to take people on tours of my town. So the town where I live in Japan has lots of history of ghost stories. And then when the pandemic started, those tours had to stop. So Japan, just like in the West, they have this history of storytelling. And whereas in the West we have campfires that we gather around, in Japan they would gather together and each person would have a candle. And as the night progressed and each person told their stories, they would, blow out their candles one by one. So as the night got darker and darker and darker, the stories got scarier and scarier. And people might know about that if they're familiar with Japan. It's called the Hyaku Monogatari Kaidankai, which means like 100 stories, 100 ghost stories. And in August, that's when the Japanese tend to tell their ghost stories. There's a lot of reasons why. It has to do with a holiday, and it has to do with like the summers being so hot and you're supposed to get kind of chills and cool off from the ghost stories. So during the pandemic, we couldn't do that. And I just thought, well, let's give it a try and see if we can just do something online. And so that's how the Kaidankai started, where I asked people to send me their stories, and I read one story every day for 100 days. And then it was supposed to end after that 100 days, but people kept writing to me like how much they had enjoyed it. So then I just kept it going, and so now it's just weekly. Well, I think there are two things that I would do differently, and to be honest, I think they're related to both of them. I would plan it in advance more, and I would get the help of others. For both of these projects, I didn't really know what to expect. So when I started them, I started them on the cheap, like I did free websites, and I just kind of took it as it, month by month, or story by story, to see how it would go. And I think that if you were going to do this, you should, just like businesses are told, like if you want to start a business, for example, you're told to have a marketing plan and a business plan. And I kind of wish that I had done something like that with both of these projects, like something like, okay, this is plan A, this is what I'm going to do if it doesn't go anywhere, and if this, here's plan B, here's what I'm going to do in 6 months to try to promote it more, and here's plan C, what I'd like to do in 2 years or 5 years. So I didn't do that, and I find that I'm always behind, and these were kind of hobbies when I started them. And the other thing is, like, it would be really nice to have somebody else involved, just so that everything isn't on my shoulders. Like I have to do all the promotion, I have to do the readings, I have to make the journal, and also just even for just reading, it would be nice to have somebody else give input, because sometimes I'll get stories that I'm not really sure about, and I kind of don't want to I want to make sure that it's not just my personal preferences in either one of those outlets. So those two things I wish that I had thought of in advance, and I think it would have made everything a little bit easier, and also just a little bit more professional. Yeah, I think the most important thing is to just love what you do, because I started the projects because I was interested in doing them, and no matter how hard it gets or no matter how busy I am, it's because I love them that I keep doing them. And I love so many things about it. I love the fact that people trust me enough to read their work. I love finding ways, like with White Enso, to present every single thing that comes to me. Like I try to make a page for each one that reflects what is being said in a story or told in the visual art. I love the creative community that is formed around the projects. So that, love kind of extends into different areas, but really you just have to love the projects that you're doing, because they can become a grind, even when you like them, even when you love them. And it's that interest and that love that kind of keeps the energy going. Sure. I'm going to start with the podcast. Alice Isn't Dead is my all-time favorite podcast. I don't know if you know it, but it is so cool. I couldn't wait for the next one. And I loved the openings of that podcast as much as I loved the story itself. And in fact, I loved it so much that I was inspired to write an opening just kind of as an homage to that show. And why did I like it? Well, it was literary, it was a great story, it was engaging. As a podcast, it didn't really have like a lot of the cheap thrills. It had special effects, it had background, but it didn't have like a lot of bells and whistles that I find are kind of distracting in some podcasts. The acting was just amazing, and it was just a great story. For publications, that is a little bit harder. I love the National Geographic, but to be honest, I live in Japan, And it's been a long time since I've held a paper journal or magazine in my hand. It's too expensive to ship them to Japan. And when I go to a store that will sell foreign press magazines and such, I tend to get things like, Vanity Fair or Vogue, just things that are fun. So there are a few online zines that I look at, but nothing regularly, to be honest. And I think that's kind of a sad thing to say. It's a sad thing to realize, because I prefer holding paper books and magazines to an e-reader. And yet when you're an expat, when you live, far from the places that make these things, it's a little bit harder to do that. Wow, that's a really tough question, because I personally always prefer the smaller cities to the larger cities. So I prefer a place called Nara to Kyoto, and I prefer Yokohama to Tokyo. Um, I think that if there was one place that you had to visit, I would say it would have to be Hiroshima, because for me, I'm very political, and I feel like seeing the Peace Park, seeing the displays about nuclear war and the dropping of the bomb there is really important for anybody and everybody to see. And then the city itself is very interesting, and there's a beautiful island there which is called Miyajima. So there's hiking there, and there's culture there on that island. I mean, it's the one that has the floating torii, which is, like, you've probably seen pictures of it, of the red Japanese like gate like thing that's in the water. So I guess if you had to pick one place, I would say that would be a great place to go. But the problem with Hiroshima is it's on the southern end of the island, and most people tend to go towards Tokyo and Kyoto. So my recommendations there would be, as I said, instead of Kyoto, Nara is a great place to go, because it's full of history, it's full of the same kinds of things, but it's a little bit less popular, less crowded, and you can walk around it very nicely. And then the same thing with Yokohama.